Do you dream about your next trip? You're in the right place. On the Time to Talk Travel podcast, we come to you weekly to share places to go and what to do when you get there. Let's dive into this week's adventure.
Welcome back to another episode of Time to Talk Travel podcast. Today, we are going to dive into a city and share some of the things we did, things that we would put on our list for next time, and help you plan your next trip. This time, we're talking about New Orleans.
It's one of my favorite cities. I'm not going to lie. We go there a couple times a year. We have different reasons. I think the funniest thing you have to start with, though, is how to say it.
Amen.
Because it is not New Orleans. Well, some people say Nolans, but that's usually if you're like Vern or from there. But New Orleans. Yes, we all agree?
100%.
Okay. It drives me insane because my husband does all the different kinds of combos of that, but New Orleans. Most people think Mardi Gras, beads, partying, insanity, but there is so much culture there beyond the party. Every time we go, we experience something new. Once you know the history of it, everything just means a little bit more and has a better story to go along with it. From the food to the places you stay to the things around it, even the Mississippi River and the history. It's just a really cool, interesting old city.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I love anything with history and architecture and kind of a feeling of being in the past. And New Orleans hits all of that for me. One of my favorite reasons we used to go to New Orleans when we lived in Texas was they had the parade that was in December. Jingle Crew was there was like a green bearded elf. There was Santa. It's an entire parade. They throw beads, but they also throw candy and toys for the kids. And the kids loved it. It was one of their favorite things we did there. They would ask to go back every year. You could get on the route and sit right next to it. There were dancing grandmas in costumes, Rockette style. It was amazing. It was so much fun. It's such a toned down version of Mardi Gras that's family accessible.
Yeah.
When I think of New Orleans, I think of beignets and hurricanes from Pat O'Brien's. New Orleans is what Mo said. It's a party. It is a good time, great music everywhere you turn. The New Orleans Jazz Festival is a highlight for a lot of people each year. I've been there for a conference for work, and I went for national championship college football game. It's just a party before and a party after, and Bourbon Street. I love the old architecture and the music, walking through the streets, playing music in a parade, just, even funeral marches. A good time. Now, it could be a crazy time. My daughter was saying the last time she was there, she saw somebody stealing money out of a purse, which I know happens everywhere. Whenever you're going somewhere and there's going to be debauchery, you're going to be drinking, you're going to be partying.
Be smart.
Wear the crossbody.
Really like mostly Bourbon Street. And Bourbon Street is crazy. When people think about where to stay in New Orleans, they might get excited to stay on Bourbon Street or in the French Quarter. But you really have to understand what that means and that the party can go literally all night. Like people drink in the street all day. They also do a lot of other things in that street all day, which are noisy and smelly. So you may or may not, maybe you want that experience. There's some beautiful hotels and little boutique hotels right along Bourbon Street. Asked to stay on the backside so that you're on Bourbon, but you're not overlooking. If you're going there for one of the parades, you want to be right on Bourbon and you want to have one of those balconies, then that's a different experience. It can be a party or it can just actually be a beautiful cultural experience. Not everything in New Orleans is Bourbon Street. The biggest danger is probably actually falling on the sidewalks because they go like this. But there's the Garden District, which is where Commander's Palace is, which is a phenomenal restaurant, has a dress code. We didn't get in once because my daughter wore shorts. There's a cemetery across the street that we did a phenomenal tour in. You can definitely find amazing cemetery tours, and I highly recommend finding a quality one.
Yeah. And one of the most important things to realize too is you can't just walk into a cemetery in New Orleans. And people think, oh, well, I don't need to book a tour. I'm just going to go look. You can't do that in most of the ones you're going to want to see. You have to go in with somebody. There are some further outside of the city, but you can't just go wander in and walk around. You do have to have a tour guide with you.
And you'll get so much. I don't even know if it's all true, but it's entertaining at the very least. The big sort of crematorium things. They put people in there for a year and a day so that the body is gone to ash. I guess as Catholics, they can't cremate, so it naturally cremates the body. They open it back up and they push the ashes into the mausoleum thing that the family's in. That's where I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. They use the 10-foot pole to push back. They used to put people in there and then find scratch marks on the inside a year later and realize that person may not have been dead. So then they used to tie a string to the dead person's hand. And that's where dead ringer comes in. The graveyard shift, because you're responsible for your maintenance. Anyway, there's just all those cool things where you're like, I don't even know if that's true, but it's entertaining. We've done ghost tours, crazy ghost tours. But like I was saying, the Garden District is a beautiful place. Sandra Bullock has a house out there. There's a trolley that you can take in. As you were saying, I wouldn't want to rent a car in New Orleans. I agree. I used to drive a Ford F-250, and driving that in those little streets is definitely a challenge and wouldn't recommend it. There's the business district, which is right west of Canal Street. And that's where the Waldorf Astoria is, the casino is, the convention center is. And that's a different vibe as well. Now, this is all within, easily accessing the French Quarter, which is where you kind of, if you wanted to experience Bourbon Street or Jackson Square. I think you guys had said you've been to Jackson Square. It's right by Café du Monde, where the artists and the musicians all are.
And the beignets.
Yeah, the beignets are at Café du Monde. At Café du Monde, if you go, there'll be a huge line. First of all, it goes pretty quick. And we've been there all through different variations of COVID. But around the back, if you don't want to wait in the line, they have an express line. And you can go get your beignets and then walk up the stairs behind and go eat them and view the Mississippi River, which is pretty cool too.
So with the hotels, I know that Mo was saying about the different areas to stay in, and there's all these different places. My very first trip to New Orleans, I stayed on Bourbon Street with the balcony, and it was not a good idea. No quiet whatsoever. And I'm a heavy sleeper. So if I'm bothered by that and I'm having trouble sleeping, I cannot even imagine someone who's a lighter sleeper. If you want to be kind of in the middle of it all near the French Quarter, there's Westin that's overlooking the Mississippi River that's kind of removed because only people coming into the hotel and that area are really staggering by there. It's a tall hotel. You can get put up high. You're not going to hear anything. There are quite a few hotels over near the Superdome. And so the Hyatt and the Hyatt House over there, great ones for families. The Hyatt House gives you a lot of space right near the streetcar. It was super easy to come in. So I know for me, those are some where I really do like to be right near everything, but it was much easier to park at some of those areas, leave the car, and then when we're going to leave New Orleans to continue on somewhere else, it was an easy one to do. Yeah. I do like to stay accessible to everything, but the streetcar system is really easy to use.
Yeah, and even just get off like a block or two off Bourbon Street. Royal is beautiful. It's hard to describe because a block over, it's much quieter, and it's antique stores and some of my favorite little boutiques where I buy dresses and hats and all the more European things. Hotel Monteleone is the one with a carousel bar that's notoriously haunted. I haven't stayed there. A friend of mine did. She swears she saw a ghost. You guys know her. That was Heather Greenwood Davis. You go in and check out the carousel bar. It actually very slowly rotates. So it's pretty cool. They actually even let my little dogs in. My friend had her baby and I had 2 dogs with me, and it's a beautiful hotel. The fact we walked in and sat in the bar and had a drink or in the lounge was amazing. So there's a Sonesta hotel that is on Bourbon. They have rooms on the back. Just got to do a little bit of your research for sure. And there's also tons of Airbnbs. You can stay in some pretty cool old houses. Whatever your vibe is, they definitely have it. Don't be rudely awakened or never go to sleep like Nas.
One of those quintessential pictures that I think everyone takes in New Orleans their first time there, because you see the sign and you're like, wait, what? Is when you see the house for sale and it says not haunted. And you're like, they have to say that? Yeah,
they do.
They do.
Yeah.
That's another thing I think about with New Orleans is the voodoo and the Disney Tiana's story. Was it Princess and the Frog? What is that one?
Yes,
but
Princess and the Frog.
That voodoo is legit in New Orleans. You darn well believe.
Oh yeah. And you can dive into the history, even if you do a tour and where they take you between the churches and the voodoo places and the history, and then you bring in the Creole food, and then you bring in the jazz. If you haven't been to Preservation Hall, you need to go to Preservation Hall. It is the most basic. I think it's been going for like 100 and something years. Obviously not the same band, but it's the Preservation Hall band. They're incredible.
Maybe it is.
You do not have what?
Maybe it is.
Or maybe it is. I'm sure there's still a few old dudes hanging around. It doesn't have air conditioning though, and it is a small room. The VIP seats are the benches in the front. The rest you just stand. It's right next to Pat O'Brien's. So we usually go and get a hurricane, just one, because more than one, that might be how you die. They're very, very strong if you haven't had a hurricane before.
And we're talking about the hurricane drinks. If you've not
Yes,
been,
right,
you don't know about
cocktail.
it. That's
Hurricane
a popular drink. Have you ever been to Little Dizzy's?
No.
Okay, that's a Creole place. And when I think Louisiana, I think gumbo. I wish we were doing this podcast tomorrow because I'm actually going to an event for Louisiana tomorrow here where they're talking about the music is back, and it would be so perfect. So I'll have to tell you.
No. So I know you guys are both talking about the hurricanes, and I like a hurricane. Hurricanes are rum based, right? And so they're dangerous.
But like every kind of rum.
I know. Every kind of rum. But and there are distilleries that you can visit in New Orleans as well to drink rum and all of that. I love Sazerac and I like absinthe, which also will put you out. And so I'm excited when I go there to get like drinks that are made really well, because you get out of New Orleans and it's like one drink that everyone knows how to make, and that's what you're getting if you're having Sazerac.
French 75 if you don't like bourbon and whiskey. French 75 is a champagne or prosecco with either gin or brandy and a lemon twist. My favorites. First place I ever had that, and now you can order it pretty much anywhere, but it's lovely. And then there was another one I was going to tell you. Got all excited.
It happened.
I think the oldest bar in the United States is there. It's pretty cool, totally haunted. Many of the ghost tours start there. So you really just have to kind of feel your vibe. The Court of Four Sisters has a beautiful brunch. We did an Easter brunch there. First place we tried turtle soup. The frog legs, there's a place right in Jackson Square that have frog legs. They're really good. But these are things you just have to kind of experience and really like embrace the culture and put yourself a little bit out of your comfort zone because everything is a little weird.
Yeah, definitely. And there are a lot of museums in New Orleans. You could spend an entire trip there just going between all of the museums. So there's a voodoo museum, there's a pharmacy museum, there's a museum of death. I mean, anything you can think of for a museum, you can do there. I love New Orleans. I think it's a fantastic city. My husband has been with me before. It's not his favorite. He thinks it feels depressing. And I think he's wrong, but whatever. And so, but there's like a slight haunting background to some of the things you do. Like is it called a calliope? Do you know the river steamboat that plays the music out of the organ? Is that called a calliope, or am I making that up?
I can't remember what it's called.
Okay,
I haven't done
plays
it.
music as it goes down the river. It should be jolly, and some of the songs are, and then some of them sound a little sad. And you're watching the boat go down the river. And there are a lot of experiences in the general New Orleans area. So that entire area has a lot of plantations. And if you have time to go outside of New Orleans, about 40 to 50 minutes outside of New Orleans is the Whitney Plantation. That's going to be the only plantation that I know of or have seen where everything is told from the perspective of the slaves and slavery. So what it was like to be a slave, what slavery did. None of it is about, oh, here's the people who lived in the plantation house and this was a plantation and they had slaves. It legitimately is from the other perspective. And it's such a different way to look for it. It's past New Orleans, going towards Florida. Definitely, if you have older children or you're adults traveling, check it out. It's so educational.
It's interesting you guys are talking about your kids being there, because I've never thought of New Orleans as a place I would want to bring my kids.
They love it.
Oh,
They've been there like 5 or 6 times. My youngest is a little over Bourbon Street. She's seen a little too much. She's 12. She's been going since she was 8. But you know what? I think it's great because she'll never want to be the college kid saying street. It's like, no, I've so done that. I've done that my whole childhood.
It's the music.
That's what I'm saying. Most of New Orleans is super classy and cultural, and there's so much to share with your kids in history. It's at another museum. There's a really amazing World War II museum that I'm dying to go to the last 4 times. Maybe we'll do it for Thanksgiving, which is also a strange time to go. But Bourbon House has an amazing Thanksgiving dinner that we've been to for the last 3 years. And they do a full turkey dinner and everything for you. And then they've got some amazing twists on things.
Yeah, and there are some very specific to holidays things that if you know what time of year you're going, you can see if there's anything special. From food to events, there is an entire snow event in New Orleans. They have indoor ice and they have snow going. I think it's in the Superdome, and it's an entire holiday event. And the holiday parade that we used to go for, also special dishes. At the end of Lent, they've got gumbo zerbs, which is a gumbo that isn't made any other time of year. I used to make it at home and I love it, but it was very specifically served around that Lenten time period when Easter was coming up. And it's a green gumbo with herbs in it. It's delicious. Kids love New Orleans. We've gone through there so many times to get to other places that it became a great place to stop because it was the right amount of hours away. But I mean, what's not to like for a kid? Okay. And I had young kids at the time, right? So you got beignets, which are basically extra sugary donuts. Check and win. You've got parades where they throw candy to you. Excellent. You've got City Park, which is a giant park with playgrounds and tons of stuff to run around in. You get to ride the lion statue. I mean, come on. Kids love that. The riverboat that plays the music that they get to watch. And some of the best pictures I have are from trips to New Orleans. My youngest daughter loved to dance. So the second music came on, she's out there shaking her groove thing to it. And some of the action shots I have of her just dancing in front of bands are, I mean, they're priceless.
And Nasreen's in the middle of the street. It's not a bad life lesson, too.
Yeah.
You know, there is poverty they're going to see. There is kids who are drumming on buckets. The questions come up. Why are they drumming on buckets? You know what I mean? There's a lot of things that give kids perspective that maybe, especially if they live in a suburban area and they don't see that kind of urban culture very often. And then again, trying the new foods. I mean, the fact that my kids have tried legs. One of our favorite restaurants is called Cochon, and they have rabbit dumplings that are ridiculous. They're my daughter's absolute favorite food, which is a weird thing, I think, for an 18-year-old to say. Those all come from them going the first time and being addicted to beignets. And every day must start with a beignet.
Agreed. Another thing I think about when I think of New Orleans is Hurricane Katrina. Do they have special monuments or anything there dedicated to that? Because there were so many lives lost and so much heartbreak. Do you know?
You can still honestly see some of the, I guess what you say, like the aftermath of it. New Orleans is a tough one because when you're in the French Quarter, you don't necessarily see real life. We often stay outside of the French Quarter because we're there for sailing and not necessarily just to be a tourist. There are still houses that are abandoned. But if you're talking about a memorial of some sort, I don't know, to be honest. That's something we could look into. But
there's one over near the hospital cemetery, and I'm trying to figure out exactly what the area of New Orleans is called there. But I think it's near Navarre and Lakewood, Dixon. Yeah, it's not an area you would end up in if you were just in New Orleans to see Bourbon Street, because it's going to be closer to the highway that you're going through on. So like 610 and 10. But it's on hospital grounds and there is a memorial. It's built in like a spiral. There's benches, there's plaques, and it's dedicated to the lives lost. But I know that there's some other one-off memorials that are for specific groups of victims. So, you know, maybe this specific association that had something to do with the coast will put something up. They're sprinkled around.
The other thought for me, New Orleans, is Mardi Gras, which is back to the whole party theme and the beads. It's just sort of a rite of passage thing. Everybody goes to Mardi Gras once kind of thing.
I think the only way I would do it is friends of mine just were on a float. They were in the Mardi Gras parade. Apparently it's difficult to do and very expensive to do, but that's a bucket list. I would be in the Mardi Gras parade before standing on the side.
Yeah. One of my kids went to LSU, which is in Baton Rouge, which is up the road an hour or so. He went for Mardi Gras. As a college kid, it's what you do. It's a big party. My daughter, when she went to New Orleans, it wasn't for Mardi Gras. It was for another college football game when UF played LSU. And so it was a party for her. Again, to me, if there's one city in America that is the definition of party, it is New Orleans. But as you said, it's so much more. It is. So go there for more than Mardi Gras.
I purposely kind of avoid New Orleans during Mardi Gras because I don't like crowds that much, but just a couple of little things like Mardi Gras is not just one day. A lot of times people think it's one day. It is a kind of large carnival thing going on. And then what we usually see is the ending of it. So just sure when you're going, you're aware of what's going on. So you're going to be involved if you want to, but you're not planning a trip during a time where there's a ton of celebrations and you think it's only that one day.
These places are tiny. They're just physically tiny. So some of our favorite restaurants like Irene's Room, I'm trying to think of some of the other ones. They're little and they book out months in advance, even Preservation Hall to get jazz tickets. You do have to plan it a little bit. You guys know me, I'm not a planner. So if I'm telling you to plan, I have not been able to wing it. I've been taking both my mother-in-law and father-in-law there. That was an interesting trip too. Separately, they're not together. And their eyes just like, because they only thought of it as Bourbon Street and only young people go there and, flash for beads and do your thing. And trust me, that still happens even if it's not Mardi Gras. And my father-in-law is like, gotta slow down. So even like multi-generationally, took my mother-in-law for her birthday to Commander's Palace for the birthday brunch. Just super special memories to share on either side, whether with your kids or with the older generation.
You've made it sound very appealing.
I quite love it there.
New Orleans can be a little overwhelming for people. I know as a former Texan and going back and forth through, you have to put in work. People think you go through New Orleans when you drive. You don't. You're on the pass around it. You have to actually put in effort and come over a bridge to get to New Orleans. If you want to have some of the experience without going into New Orleans, there are now beignet spots. Cafe du Monde has little spots along the highway so you can stop and get your beignets. It's not exactly the same as looking at the Mississippi River, but it's a lot shorter lines and they're still delicious. And you can stop and get different types of food on your way too. It's not feasible for everyone to swing into as a stop. Highly recommend traveling there. Love New Orleans, and really leaning into the history and culture on my end is my passion there. And bring your kids. Really and truly, if you're not going at specific times of year, it is absolutely an appropriate place to bring children.
Good to know.
Might give them a heads up because
Yep.
they're going to see some stuff still. But as Des said, you got to keep your wits about you. It is a tourist place and it does have some socioeconomic challenges. So keep your wits about you. Also, if you're not into crowds and you're not into chaos, maybe head out of the French Quarter after you've had dinner and don't lollygag about, because it starts to get a little wild and you have to have a little bit more cognizant of who's around you. Unless you love hanging out with college kids and super drunk people, then you found your people. Yay.
So exciting. I mean, I could go through New Orleans for days because half the time, New Orleans is one of those places you go, and I was telling Des this earlier, where you forget what you've seen there, and then you're talking about it, you're like, oh wait, I saw that there. Like the whole, is National Treasure the movie with Nicolas Cage in it?
It is.
So that's where they have that triangle tomb that's
Is
in
it?
the movie. Yeah, it's in New Orleans. We didn't even get into the Lafitte.
You could just
the
do
pirate
church
treasure.
tour.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could just do church tours. I'm blanking on what the mega church is in Jackson Square with the beautiful statue that lights up at night. Saying this, like, you're like, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. Like, even in Jackson Square, we've bought so much artwork, like beautiful paintings. And, we've taken the horse-drawn carriage tour. It took me I'm not kidding, 5 or 6 times before my daughter finally wore me down to sit on the horse tour. But I'll tell you, parents, you can bring a drink on the horse tour. So I sat my father-in-law and my 10-year-old at the front, and they had a great tour. My husband and I sat at the back, and we had a great tour too. So
Yeah. And so that's St. Louis Cathedral. I've been in that one with the girls. We went in there and checked it out, and it is a beautiful one and a very popular spot to take pictures.
Yeah, there's a statue that lights up and it puts the shadow up on the side, on the back of the wall, but that's on the opposite side of Jackson Square. You were saying, does the architecture, just walking down and you've got all the wrought iron railings and the beautiful flower baskets and the flags. They love decorating their balconies. It's just a very visually stimulating place as well. Like, you don't have to do anything, just wander around and look at what you got around you. And the people around you are from all different places. I love people watching. One of my favorite hobbies is just to sit somewhere and watch people experience the same thing in a different way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Good.
Definitely.
I'm all for people watching.
It definitely is a place that you could go to and do absolutely nothing and just watch people and come away with more than you'd see in some other cities.
I forgot my one other favorite thing.
Yep.
I told you I like I got Kentucky Derby style, beautiful, big, crazy hats, which I've always wanted, but when I lived in Canada, I didn't really have anywhere to wear that. I have quite that fascinator and hat collection, and everybody asks me where I get them from, and they're all from this one store in New Orleans and every time we go, even my son has fedoras from there. My husband just looks at it and goes, oh God, how much are you guys going to spend in the hat store? And it's not that it's overly expensive. It's just I have no hat self-control, apparently.
I love it. Good to know.
Sure, I'm wearing a pretty dress and we all went to brunch and we all wore our hats. Like, it's like dress up for real life. You guys are all like,
I love it for you. I'm a
too.
visor and flip-flop girl always, but yeah.
And
I
I'm
love
not
it
a
for
hat.
you.
I'm not a hat person because my hair gets large and then I put a hat on and then I look ridiculous for the rest of the day. So I don't do it. But I have a daughter who can pull off any hat and look amazing. It's honestly a talent. Some people are just made for hats and some are not. So I've got two other New Orleans things that I want to pop out there. One is, I know I mentioned City Park before. It's like 1,300 acres. It's huge. It's away from the French Quarter area. There's also a place called Audubon Park. It's a ways removed. It's quieter. There's some beautiful areas to take pictures. That's where the zoo is. And also, we were talking about the Katrina memorials before, and I had forgotten. They put in the circles that you walk in the bricks, and it's like a memorial labyrinth. It's very peaceful. I'm a huge fan of Audubon Park. Gorgeous pictures looking over the Mississippi River in a different area that isn't as busy. Then I'm going to swing wildly to the other side here, right? Because that was all about serenity and pretty pictures. If you have children who think that certain names are funny or words, or like maybe they're in that pre-teen 6 to 10-year-old range where everything is funny and ties to a bathroom joke, there are some restaurant names in New Orleans that you really just prepare them for it before you go so that you're not there and they're pointing at the sign and making, a scene. Like Cooter Brown's and Dookie Chase are the two I'm thinking of immediately. And then I know that there's some more, but just know that there are things that are named what they will twist into something else and maybe just run it by them so that yeah.
I thought you were going to talk about the t-shirts in the gift shops.
Oh, no, that too. But no.
That is a whole other. I actually bought my 3 daughters one time and they're only allowed to wear them at home. And it's only because my 3 daughters never agree on anything. But I did get them bitch 1, bitch 2, bitch 3 t-shirts. So yeah, they only wear those at home. Another one that you just reminded me of, they pop back in your head, right? In the Garden District, we did a walking tour. And within that, there's a lot of cool things like, it's beautiful to begin with. It's just a serenity walk just through beautiful houses and gardens. But the American Horror Story house is there, the big white house. Anne Rice's house is there, the author, Interview with the Vampire, right? Among other ones. And Sandra Bullock's house is there as well. There's also an ice cream shop, and that's where we walk to. That's always the final destination because if we make it, they get ice cream.
And if you have been listening to the podcast for a while, well, thank you, first of all. But our very first episode was the Set Jet Travel one. And we were talking about places to go where movies were set and everything. That was the very first podcast we put out. I always think that New Orleans is such a good example of this. For me, it's mostly TV, right? Like NCIS New Orleans, I'm thinking. And when I go to New York, it's, SVU and all the crime shows, apparently. But it can be really fun to just wander around some of the areas or even look them up in advance to get pictures for them when you're in New Orleans, because there is so much that is just familiar. And you'll see it and be like, oh, where is that from?
House of the Rising Sun. There's another one. You don't even need to pay a tour. Just go for a wander. And you can bring a drink with you all over the place. It's like called not open container. I always want to say open carry, but that's very different.
That is very different. Don't do that.
Don't do that. Actually, I'm not sure if you can in New Orleans. You might be able to. Anyway, that before you do it.
Yeah, definitely check. Open container, open carry.
Open container means you can drink on the street. I remember walking into the Waldorf Astoria with a hurricane in a plastic cup and feeling very not fancy. But that was as a Canadian walking in and being like, I can drink in the street and walk into my hotel. That's crazy.
You guys have convinced me.
It's a fun girlfriend getaway. Southwest flies there. There's some lower
Mhm.
cost carriers. You can look for what's not popular and get some pretty decent fares into there.
It's a great
Now-
couples trip too. Grab a couple of other couples because there's a lot of nice dinners and cocktails and dressing up, or even just a date weekend. Go with
Good to
your
know.
go with your special person.
Well, we could again talk for hours on this topic because New Orleans just sneaks up on you. Things just keep coming and you're like, oh yeah, there was that, or I want to see that next time. Honestly, a podcast about the things I still want to do in New Orleans would be longer than this one was because there is so much more to dive into. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Time to Talk Travel. Back next week with a different topic. Until then, happy travels.
This has been another episode of Time to Talk Travel, brought to you by #travels.com. You can keep in touch with us between episodes by checking out our site, joining our newsletter, or connecting with us on social. We've always got the information you need in our episode notes. Until next time, happy travels, and thanks for being a part of our trip.